So I shared that, well, it's Mother's Day. Some of us pay attention to that. I often called it a Hallmark holiday, so I had to look it up. And I thought mothers came against war and started it, but I was wrong. It's a few women in the late 1800s wanted to honor their mothers, thought it was fun. They were doing this as a special way to give honor to the mothers in the world. Also recognizing that, as I mentioned with the Haudenosaunee and the Akwesasne, the elder women often, historically, ancestrally, are honored. So all of that. But Woodrow Wilson made it a holiday and encouraged the florists and the card makers to get involved. And the same woman who sort of initiated this then had a campaign to cancel it because she did not see it. And I won't remember her name right now, but you can look it up, Original Mother's Day. Julia something, but I'm not going to open my phone to tell you. What I'll say is that she had a campaign against the commercialization of Mother's Day. And I think that's good for us to hold as well. But our room is a little more empty because our families are not here, as many are out doing things with each other. So I shared the 7-generation perspective of Haudenosaunee and how the women were looked at as sort of the final arbiters. What I'll say I've noticed in my lifetime is a re-indigenation of the planet where more and more indigenous people are coming forward rather than what I thought when I first learned about the genocide of Native Americans. I thought they were all dead, but I was wrong. And the re-indigenation and the rematriation rather than repatriation, the term has been changed in that context to rematriation, let's rematriate our culture, our language, our ways, and we're seeing it. Hopefully everyone else is as well. So I wanted to sort of honor that in terms of it being Mother's Day. Also, the fact that that maternal spirit that we all have inside of us is the same spirit that was putting bottles of water in the desert for migrants who were coming this way. So maybe someone thinking, I can't quite fight it all, but I'll put water along the path. Of course, it's a different spirit that, and a spirit we need to excise that was then emptying the water. That story is powerful. So I wanted to give a moment of context around my Judaism or Judaism in general, because today's guest is with Congregation Beit Simchat Torah. And my partner Phil made a point to sort of say, we should do more with them. We as a family, but also we as a congregation, pay attention to what other congregations are doing and see how we too, as the Brooklyn Ethical or as humanists, can connect or initiate other actions that are part of what I may reference today, tikkun olam, to heal the world, to repair the world. That's sort of a sacrosanct message that is taught in Judaism. And I thought it's important to bring it forward every day, my humanism really comes from that. Felix Adler, who founded the American Ethical Union in the late 1800s, was trained to be a rabbi. He came from a lineage of rabbis. By the way, I have some rabbis in my family too, back when, so like bring in that spirit. And he really thought it has to be deed above creed. It's not what you say, it's what you do. And for myself, that rings true, and I think for many of us who come here. So that feeling of it's what we do matters in how we can be more sacred and in touch. I'll wait for the interpreter to come up. Thank you. So that deed above creed, what we do over what we say, is so important. And I wanted to really look at other congregations and other groups of people. Bill's so involved in Extinction Rebellion. We see things that he's doing in that regard. Each of us are going out and doing different work that's of a political nature to try and make the world a better place. Thinking about it as a congregation is both fun and inspiring. Actually, Phil has in their home a beautiful batiqued piece of artwork that says L'Dor V'Dor, from generation to generation. It was a piece of artwork that another member did for us, Tasha Paley. And when Tasha did this, it was an inspiration of how do we look at inclusion over time and over many different needs and abilities. And this beautiful piece of artwork has many different people and animals coming together, looking at over the generations, from generation to generation, we can work towards peace. It may be that it's a forever journey, but we're much happier when we're on it. I just read today that some Quakers from Flushing are marching to Washington to declare that what our government is currently doing around immigration is horrible and we have to stop it. And they were doing that in the spirit of the Flushing Remonstrance, which I may get that word wrong, but that's the Flushing Remonstrance was a statement by the Quakers in the 1700s saying, we have to pay attention to the rules of this country so they align better with our values. And they're marching now to Washington for that. So other ways that congregations of people who come with a shared spirit show up. So I want to turn to the slides where we have 6 quotes, but I failed to do that important job of assigning quotes ahead of time. So I'm going to look for six volunteers to read these quotes. And if hopefully you can see them or I can hand out paper, but one of the things one does as a presider for our services or our platforms is to put together both the speaker context and our own context, and putting together the quotes is exciting. Thank you. I see Fiona has the mic, so I guess you're willing to read. Can you read the first 2?
I'll be number 1 and then I'll pass it along.
Okay.
Oh, the first 2, even
We'll take
better.
2.
It is the obligation of every person born in a safer room to open the door when someone in danger knocks. The Separated Child Foundation. A refugee is not a crime. It is not an identity or social status. It is when you are forced to leave and find yourself in a place and in a moment you don't choose. I'm not sure of the pronunciation, maybe Yagaub from Sudan.
Thanks. Thanks, Keith.
It is not our differences that divide us. It is our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences. Andre Lord.
Thanks.
We are all one, and if we don't know it, we will learn it the hard way. By Bayard Rustin.
Bill, can I ask you to read this next one?
The opposite of oppression is not only freedom, but also belonging. It is the construction of a listening and acting body around the suffering person that creates a context for transformation. Solidarity is the action behind the revelation that each of us individually are not the only people with dreams. Sarah Schulman's new book, The Fantasy and Necessity of Solidarity.
Thank you. For context, while I find the last and final volunteer, maybe someone on Zoom. Oh, Vincent, did you want to? Someone on Zoom. For context, Sarah Schulman spoke here when she wrote one of her previous books called Conflict is Not Abuse, and her new book on solidarity is important. And Vincent, please, if you can read this. It's a little long.
Accompaniment begins with stopping and noticing, crossing over the invisible lines that separate us, making time to connect, to understand, and to respond. It depends on learning about the experiences of people and listening for the kinds of assistance that are welcomed, if any. It also crucially depends on understanding that as far apart as our individual fates seem from one another, they are ultimately intimately connected. Mary Watkins, Mutual Accompaniment and the Creation of the Commons.
Thanks. Thanks. Yes, thank you. So I mentioned that I was grateful for Phil, my partner, to help bring CBST into this space, but also to bring me into CBST space, where I just love finding people coming together, aspiring collectively to do better. It's a great feeling, and it grounds me a lot. So thank you for that. And CBST has a project that Noah's going to speak to us more about called ARK, really what I might say Sanctuary in Action. Many years ago when I heard about Sanctuary, I thought it meant giving a roof over the head of people who need it. It is that, and more. And I think what's important for us to realize that if we can't give a roof to someone who needs it, and what that means in terms of capacity, what else we can do. And creating spaces of sanctuary means we create safer ways to move into this world. With the attacks with immigration right now, and migrants and people who are stepping up in resistance, we're going to see more and more of that, of people both needing sanctuary and us wanting to take risk that might mean any of us might need sanctuary. Those risks are worth taking so that we can help each other and be more connected to our values. You know, I think of the Diary of Anne Frank, where she was given sanctuary. That's one way. How else? What do we do to help people today in this country at this age and time when the process can be so complicated? I've learned from a member or a friend that they've used some of the services at CBST to help with their immigration status. And yeah, so figuring out more ways we can help. We have in the back these red cards that have been put out and promoted around the country, telling people your rights in the face of ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement, who are not the police, but they act like it. They act like military. Tachi's holding them up, but you can get one. Basically, we have rights in our Constitution and how things work. They're being messed with. But if we know the rules, at least we know what to stand on in terms of the rules of the day. I mean, what I'll say is laws change, right? Enslavement was legal in this country. As owning people as property was a legal thing back when, less than 7 generations ago. So understanding that there are laws that can be broken and changed, there are laws that are upheld to give us a sense of community, and we need to fight for the ones that we want to maintain. So I'm going to introduce Noah, who is our speaker today, and it directs the ARK Immigration Clinic at CBST. He's also a Department of Justice accredited representative, which allows him to represent immigrant New Yorkers before the Board of Immigration Appeals, the Immigration Courts, and the Department of Homeland Security. He has a master's in Urban and Environmental Policy and Planning from UEP at Tufts, and previously worked as an urban fellow in the cities in the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, MOIA. And he is a 24-25 Interfaith Civic Leadership Academy Fellow at the Interfaith Center of New York. We're going to welcome Noah to speak about what he does at CBST, and we'll have some Q&A. And because the group is small, I'm hoping we can have an intimate conversation around what we learned, what you're doing. Thanks, Noah.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much for having me. So what I can tell you a bit about is the history of the new sanctuary movement in the city and where CBST comes into that. Why we do this work, just as an LGBT Jewish congregation, as you heard a little bit about. Thank you for all the kind words about CBST, which is much appreciated. And a little bit about the nitty-gritty, what we actually do and how other communities have been stepping up in the city, how we've been supporting them to do similar work. So as you heard, one way that we can provide sanctuary is a physical place for somebody to reside, but that's often not actually the best way that a congregation can contribute to the broader immigration justice movement, and that's what CBST found. So during the first Trump presidency, we were asked, could you become a sanctuary space for people who are fearful of immigration enforcement and have a sort of objective reality related to their case that makes that a very reasonable fear. And frankly, the building is not a good prospect for that. Our space is very beautiful, but it doesn't have beds, shower, windows in much of the space. It's on 30th Street between 6th and 7th in Manhattan. And it would not be an ideal place for someone to seek physical sanctuary in the way that you might have heard people doing during the first Trump administration and well before as well. But what we did think we could do was host a legal clinic. We thought that was a way that we could contribute to the broader work happening in the city. We have a very nice lower level of the building, and it's really an ideal space for doing the sort of legal clinic that we do now. So this was in 2019. Actually, I think just a couple days ago was the 6th anniversary of our first clinic. And at the time, we worked really closely with an organization some of you might have heard of called the New Sanctuary Coalition, NSC, which was housed within Judson Memorial Church on Washington Square Park. And they did phenomenal work. They had an amazing weekly asylum legal clinic that met at NYU Law School right next door to Judson Church. And it was totally oversubscribed every, I think, Tuesday at that time. They had hundreds of people coming to that clinic, taking over the law school. And they asked CBST, who was on the board of the New Sanctuary Coalition, could you help us out? Could you have a satellite location so that we could serve people elsewhere? And this precedes me. I was not a member of CBST. They hired me to work on this project, but CBST said yes. They did about a year-long process, is my understanding, of text study, of looking at history, of looking at all sorts of different resources to get to the point where they felt the community was bought in and could do this. This was not a top-down process, but it was both buy-in from clergy and a bottom-up process of members feeling really strongly this is something we have to do. And so a word about that, CBST was founded by a group of LGBT Jewish folks in the city, including one of the first members was actually an Indian Jewish man. It was mostly gay men at first, is my understanding. And so there's always been many, many members who are themselves immigrant New Yorkers. And then, of course, also many people who are the children of immigrants, the children of refugees, Holocaust survivors in many cases. So it's sort of obvious why we would do this work. You don't really have to think about it. I think that broadly within liberal Judaism, non-Orthodox Judaism, there isn't the sense of commandedness that Orthodox people feel, like I'm commanded to do this or that, whatever it might be. Except maybe in this respect, there is a feeling of commandedness, I think, around welcoming the stranger and providing this sort of support to immigrants. I think that is something where people feel a real strong sense of this is just something that we do. We don't have to really think twice about it in some parts of the Jewish world. I wish in more, but at least at CBST, that's the case. So when we started this clinic 6 years ago, it was very small. We had 2 immigrant friends and 40 volunteers. We use that language of friends because New Sanctuary Coalition used it, and we always want to make clear to people they're not our clients. We don't have it like that. We do not have an attorney-client relationship with them. We want to make sure they understand the scope of what we provide. So what do we provide if we don't represent people? That quote about accompaniment really guides the way we see our work. We do have a court accompaniment program where people literally go to court and accompany them through the process of being in immigration court when they don't have an attorney and don't necessarily have someone to orient them to that process. But we also see accompaniment as really imbuing everything we do. We have weekly asylum clinics where we assist people to complete the application for asylum, the Form I-589. And then we have monthly work permit clinics where we help them apply for their employment authorization and social security number. This work is not done only by legal workers. You heard I'm what's called an accredited representative, so I can do many of the things that attorneys do. We do have staff attorneys as well, but really the engine of our work are our volunteers who are members of the congregation and many, many others at this point who have learned about our work over the last 6 years. And so we form small teams of 2 to 3 people who will support an individual asylum seeker through the process, beginning with an intake form, which is reviewed by an attorney to figure out what form of relief they might be eligible for. And then if they make the decision, it's always their choice to assess the risk for themselves, and we'll support them either way. If they decide to apply for asylum, then we help them with that. We complete the application. And once they're eligible for their work permit, which is 6 months later, unfortunately, the government makes you wait 6 months from filing for asylum to be eligible at the earliest for your work permit. We help them with that form then. Once they have a final hearing in immigration court, which is called an individual hearing, if they still don't have an attorney, we'll help them with that too. And that is a real big lift. It takes a lot of work to prepare a case for an individual hearing, but we've had a lot of success doing that, even with people who don't have an attorney. And I should say, in immigration court, there's no right to an attorney. Or maybe better said, there is a right at no cost to the government. So the government will not provide you with an attorney. There's no public defender system. It's a civil proceeding, technically. And so if you don't have the resources or the luck to find somebody who will represent you, you are on your own. And the judge will proceed and go ahead and schedule you for a final decision, a final hearing where they decide the case and consider the merits of your case. And you might be up there alone, and you might have seen in the news, even that could be a child, that could be a 5-year-old who has to proceed without representation. So it's a very hostile environment to be in. Nonetheless, with our support, we have helped 65 people at this point win asylum. We've actually had 15 people win asylum just in about a month period in March and April. So despite the terrible news, the terrible changes in immigration policy, on the individual level, there are these successes. We are able to assist people. So these sort of projects can have a real powerful impact on the individuals who benefit from it, as well as our volunteers who now are able to go out into the world and talk to their friends and talk to other people with I statements and personal stories about the people they've worked with and their own now more personal experience vicariously with the immigration system. And so that's another reason that we do the work the way that we do it, the model that we do. So in addition to that work at CBST, we also host what we call the New York City Pro Se Collaborative, which is a network of other communities. Many are faith-based, but not all are, who are doing similar work. So we have communities throughout the New York City area, the Long Island Immigration Clinic, which is in Brentwood, Long Island, some very lovely nuns who started a wonderful project there. Solidaridad in Central Jersey, South Brooklyn Sanctuary in Bay Ridge, the Asylum Support Clinic at Rutgers Presbyterian Church on the Upper West Side, number of other. Those are just a taste of some of the communities that are part of this network. And we convene monthly to share best practices for doing this work, which I should have said is pro se is the term that we use. That means for yourself, as in no one's representing you, you're doing it yourself, but with our help. And so this is a network of communities doing pro se legal work to support asylum seekers. So it's a burgeoning area of work because we know there are not enough attorneys to go around. People cannot afford private attorneys. Even if they could, there are not enough. And there are not enough pro bono resources for people. And so these sort of legal access programs are designed to meet that need. Is it ideal? No. Obviously, full representation would be better, but this is the context we're working in. So that's a little bit about, who we are at CBST, what we are doing, and what some of our partner organizations are doing. I want to tell you a little bit more too about some of the asylum-seeking friends who we work with, who are all generally extraordinary people who've faced a lot of hardship, and it's really exciting for us to be able to play a modest, small role in their journey, their ability to get around the obstacles in front of them so they can actually bring what they're supposed to be bringing to the world and are often not able to because of their immigration status. We've worked with people from more than 50 countries. Because of our LGBT focus, we do see some of the typical flows you might see in the news. For example, Venezuelans. There was a moment where a lot of Venezuelans were coming, or Mauritanians. Those flows, we see it, but we also see different ones. For example, our number one country of origin, actually, I want to ask, what do you think? I'm curious what you might think our number one country of origin would be, where people would be coming from. Yeah. China. That's an excellent guess. We actually see very few Chinese people because I think they have different networks through the Chinese and Chinese American community where they seek assistance. But there are so many Chinese people in immigration court in New York. Yeah. Haiti, that's a great one too. We do see some Haitians. We have someone with an asylum interview tomorrow from Haiti. I hope it goes well, but not so many. That's a great guess. When we first started, we did a ton of Russian cases. There was a group founded at CBST called Rusa LGBT, and it was founded for Soviet Jews during that period of immigration who found themselves very isolated here from the broader society, but also their own immigrant community because they were LGBT. And so they started a support group, and then we worked closely with them. Now they welcome people who are primarily not Jewish, but LGBT from former Soviet Union countries. So we did have a moment where we're doing a lot of those cases, but I will tell you, just because I think it is surprising for people, it's Jamaica. And I think it's somewhat known that the conditions in Jamaica for LGBT people are very challenging and poor. But we really do see tons and tons of folks from Jamaica who are both LGBT and people who are fleeing gang violence and might not have a claim based on their gender and sexuality. And to give you a sense of who's been winning asylum, what are sort of, why would someone qualify for asylum? Why would the judge grant them? It is inhospitable, but there are good protections for LGBT applicants in particular. Asylum is based on having a future fear of persecution in your home country. The best way to show that is past persecution. If in the past you were harmed or mistreated, but only on account of one of 5 reasons, it's very restrictive. So if you are leaving because of climate change, that's not going to work. If you are leaving because of domestic violence, it might work, but it's going to be hard. If it's because of gang violence, okay, maybe, but it's going to be hard. The 5 reasons are race, religion, particular social group, nationality, and political opinion. Some are very clear: race. If you're fleeing persecution on account of your race or your religion or your nationality. Political opinion can be, I'm a member of this party and that other party doesn't like us and they are attacking us. It can also be, I believe a certain thing. I believe that women should have certain rights, or LGBT people should have certain rights. It's more broad. And particular social group is really broad. And that's where our LGBT claims come. That is a particular social group. So some of the folks we've had recently who've won asylum have been a lesbian woman from Peru, a lesbian couple from El Salvador and their children, a woman from Jamaica and her children who were fleeing gang violence. And we do a lot of Garifuna cases. So Garifuna are Afro-Indigenous people in Honduras and Guatemala and elsewhere in Central America. And we had a Garifuna case as well. So those are some of the folks who we've just had, the honor of being able to hear their stories, work with them on telling their stories to a very particular audience before an immigration judge. It's not, maybe the way you would choose to tell your story, but it's the way they have to. And so it's a difficult process for us too, as staff and volunteers, because we have to ask questions about things that people may have never talked about to a stranger. And that is not comfortable. But our volunteer model is really what is able to make it as comfortable as possible, because instead of one staff attorney with 100 clients, each friend gets 2 volunteers who are solely focused on them at that time. and that frees up our staff to administer the whole thing. So I'm going to leave it there for now, but just to say, if anyone would like to volunteer, you're very, very, very welcome, and I can give you more information about how we bring in new volunteers, how you might be able to join us in the future. And we can also talk more about how you might step up as a community in other ways. But I hope that's a helpful overview to our work.
Share the mic, sure. So I'm inviting Noah to share the mic with me, and I'll start with some questions, and I'm sure other people will have some, or maybe a context. The telling your story part seems so important for a friend to sit with someone who is under duress for their status and their situation, and anticipating going before the courts. What does that listening feel like? What are some ways that you help train the volunteers or prepare them for being good listeners that make the space comfortable, as I understand it, for people to begin to tell their story?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think active listening is such an important skill in this work. And it's funny, we work with many law students and attorneys, and they're often quite poor at all of these sorts of skills. And our non-legal worker volunteers are often much better. So if you're sitting out there and you're thinking, well, I'm not an attorney, I don't know anything about immigration law. Honestly, this work I think is often best done by well-meaning people who are good, active listeners and don't necessarily have training in immigration law. So in addition to the application for asylum, you have to prepare more evidence. The best evidence, I always tell people, because sometimes they say, well, I don't have anything. I never made a police report, because why would I do that? The police doesn't protect you in my country. Or I never went to the hospital. I was attacked, but I didn't go to the hospital because I thought the police would be there, and I didn't even go to the hospital. My friend took care of my injuries, whatever. Say, I don't have any evidence. Well, the best evidence is your own story, your own testimony in the form of an affidavit. So one thing our volunteers do is to help people to write those stories, which have a particular legal format, but at the end of the day, it is just storytelling. And we actually work with the Writers Guild Initiative, which is the Writers Guild, the union's foundation arm. Their volunteers, who are professional screenwriters and other types of writers, will work with asylum seekers to do that. And they do a much better job than some of our big law partners, who we're grateful to as well. Because at the end of the day, it's about telling a story. So yeah, really, really anyone, I think, with the right inclination and some training from us can do it.
Great. Let me open it up for questions both in the room and on Zoom, and we can keep talking about this. Please, I didn't catch your name. Adam, go ahead, Adam. Mike's coming your way.
Thank you for that. I was wondering if you could go ahead and talk a little bit more about how to sign up for volunteering, the process.
Yes. So if you're in the room, just chat with me. I can give you a card with my email. You'll email us, and we can give you some training videos that are asynchronous. You can watch them on your own time, so you can join us on your own time. You don't have to wait for a particular training date. When you join us on a Wednesday evening, that's when our asylum clinic is. It is fully remote. It is online, I should have said earlier. So it's really accessible, we've found. When we have asylum-seeking friends for whom Zoom will not work, we schedule them in person. But we do find that Zoom is better for a lot of people. We ask for a 4 to 6 week commitment, because that is about the max that it takes to get through one case. And we like to keep consistency. And so that's what we'll tell you about via email when you reach out. We also have, if that doesn't work for you, we do work permit clinics, and those applications are easy. They take 2 hours. So that's a 1-day commitment, once a month, Friday mornings from 10. Usually we're done by 1 p.m. So that's something else. The email, I don't know for those on Zoom if we can put it in the chat or whatever, maybe you can just hear it, but it's sanctuary sanctuary@cbst.org. So if you email sanctuary@cbst.org, we can give you more info.
We have a question from that.
Yeah, hi, thank you. I was wondering if you could talk in general about the state of sanctuary protections here in New York City, especially with Mayor Adams getting the favors that he did from the White House. We're in New York State, which is not a sanctuary state, and I don't actually know what Governor Hochul is doing. I guess just in general, we hear what we're hearing in the news, but you have a specific perspective from the legal side.
Sure. I'm not a policy expert these days. I'm more in the direct service realm, but I can give you my impression. One significant change is that the Trump administration rolled back the sensitive locations policy. So it used to be that it was very difficult for ICE to carry out immigration enforcement in and around sensitive locations like congregations, hospitals. The Biden administration expanded it, I think, to include courthouses, schools. So they rolled that back. I think the optics are still very bad, which is probably why we haven't seen them going into churches to arrest people, for example. But it would be a lot easier now, and it has a chilling effect on people like us doing this work within those sensitive locations. So that's one change that's national. We do have legislation in New York from the first Trump administration that should keep ICE out of the courts here in New York. So the courts should continue to be a place where people would not face immigration enforcement. But yes, in Albany, they really failed this year to do anything substantial. The governor's big priorities were things like banning phones in school, which I think is great, sure. But like, come on, why are you thinking so small? These people think so small. And this mask ban and the priorities were just so embarrassingly small, and they failed to move on some of the things that would have protected immigrant New Yorkers. So I totally share the disappointment.
We have someone on Zoom who'd like to pose a
Oh, we
question.
have Tom. I see Tom has their hand up. We'll have Tom, and then I'll go to Bill.
Okay, thanks. So my family and I have been.
I'm sorry, Tom, we're not hearing you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. My family and I have been helping a Ukrainian family who received humanitarian parole, and recently they were approved for an 18-month extension. I was wondering, is that the case for all humanitarian parole and asylum-seeking populations, that they get approved and then they have to get reauthorized for a period? And does that mean that say for asylum seekers, if they're approved, you have to help them go back to court at 6 months, 12 months, 18 months later and repeat the process? And are they unsuccessful in the course of doing so? Or is that something that they can count on for an extended period?
Yeah, that's a great question. It gets complicated, but I will try to keep it simple. There are many ways people reach the US. Sometimes they come on valid visas, like a tourist visa, and they fly in. Other times they come across the southern border. A lot of different things could happen. One thing we see is humanitarian parole, which is at the discretion of the government to allow someone in who otherwise would not have permission for humanitarian reasons. The Biden administration had some categorical parole programs for people from 4 countries, from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, Venezuela, for people to come more regularly and safely to the US, and then the Uniting for Ukraine program for Ukrainians. So all these people were able to come with parole, but the statutory limit is only 2 years. You can only have that parole for 2 years. At the end of 2 years, you have no status to remain in the United States. So you have to do something. So that's great that they were able to extend it. Many people would apply for asylum because they do fear returning to their home country. So parole is an excellent thing. It allows people sometimes to be able to come to the US, access other relief like asylum, but in and of itself, it doesn't lead to a permanent status here. So I hope that's helpful.
Well, I just wondering, is it hard to get those extensions compared with the initial requests?
I think so. I don't have too much experience because usually when people come to us, they apply for asylum. And so they don't need to extend the parole because they're pursuing something else. But I think it is. I think it's quite challenging. And the Trump administration ended many of those parole programs. So for the Cubans, the Haitians, Nicaraguans, Venezuelans who before could come here that way, that's not on the table. And the administration has tried to strip them of the work permits they got through that program because it does, one benefit of parole is you can access for a fee a work permit.
For a fee. Go ahead, Bill.
I know you said you're not a policy expert, but the sanctuary you're doing is more of sort of like legal sanctuary, but I'm very curious about the housing challenge for refugees because I know there were these hotels that the city was renting and that the federal government tried to cancel the funding that was going towards that kind of housing for refugees. Yeah. And I don't ever hear anything about what happened to all of those people that were living in those places. I'm wondering if you could just shed any light that you're aware of just from where you're sitting.
Sure. We are located on 30th Street around the corner from the Stewart Hotel, which, if you know, the Stewart Hotel has become one of those hotels that the city was contracting with to house migrants. And so many people we work with are living in shelter or have lived in shelter. And so it's certainly a big issue. There was the, so-called crisis moment when like 200,000 people came here over the course of, I think, less than 2 years, and that really taxed the shelter system, which already was so taxed with working people who can't afford to live in this city regardless of immigration status. Now, I think it's less so simply because fewer people are coming. So if you look at the border numbers, it was not unusual 2023, 2024, some months, 100,000 people, 100,000 apprehensions at the southern border. Last month, I think it was 7,000. So that's a drop that will be felt, I think, in the city and in the shelter system. So it's not for a good reason, but it takes pressure off. But certainly it's a big issue our folks face. The legal issue is often top of mind, as is housing. They're often in really, really difficult housing situations. Yeah, hope that's helpful.
Go ahead, Tachi.
Two things. First, the fact that there's white South African refugees being given a plane ride to come here as the only exclusion group. Let's not even go into that one. But also, is it a correct understanding that one of the reasons why the border numbers have gone down so much is because people who are coming to the border with a legitimate asylum request are actually not being allowed in and not being allowed that process to begin with?
Definitely. First, it is really so infuriating that they're bringing these folks from South Africa after shutting down the entire refugee resettlement program, which, by the way, it usually takes years for people to be vetted to come through the refugee resettlement program, and they ended it. So there were people who were advanced in that process and could no longer come here. And then overnight, these people from South Africa are coming. There could not have possibly been anywhere near the type of vetting. Of course, this is the administration that brought us extreme vetting last time, but when it's these folks, no vetting. So in terms of asylum at the southern border, exactly. Asylum has been under attack for so long. I was in Tijuana in Mexico in 2018, 2019. And at that time, they did something called metering, where they metered access to asylum, which many of us think is illegal. And the way it operated was there was a notebook, a composition notebook, and you had to put your name down in that notebook. And then every day, a certain number of people could cross and actually access asylum through the port of entry. The Biden administration took that to the next level by creating a phone app called CBP1 and saying you can only access asylum through this phone app that has a limited number of appointments every single day. And if you don't use that phone app, you come some other way, you're probably ineligible and cannot win asylum simply because you did not use my phone app. So that was really terrible. It's, of course, under Trump now gone to a next level of just really closing the border to asylum seekers. So yeah, that is a big part of it. And I should say, because we have, I think, collectively forgotten some of the pandemic, there was Title 42 for years, which was supposed to be a public health order that closed the border for asylum seekers. Of course, goods continued to flow, people with status continued to flow across the border, but I believe more than 3 million expulsions happened. So people just got sent back to Mexico without any kind of screening for asylum eligibility during that period from 2020 until into, I believe, 2022, May 2022, I believe.
Go ahead, Tristan.
As we all know, the current administration has made a sort of militant anti-immigrant approach a real policy centerpiece. And I believe that they're doing that because they see political benefits. And it's really brought to mind that there seems to be a lot of negative energy in portions of our culture associated with immigration. And that always sort of surprises me, and I don't really understand what's driving that. And I was wondering if you could comment a little bit on it, on where you think that's coming from and what we collectively could do about that.
It's a great question. I don't have the answers. My 2 cents would be that while I really disagree with it, I can understand why some people would have animosity towards immigrants. Certainly, for many working people in this country, their quality of life has depreciated substantially, and the Democratic Party, in my view, hasn't offered them any story that explains that. And now the right comes in and says it's the immigrants, and the left is too weak in this country to be able to convince them that no, it's not the immigrants. So I can see why people would fall for that story. So, personally, politically, I think we do need to be able to tell a story that also names who it is, that names the 1% as being responsible for that and the inequality that we see, so that people are more, inoculated against some of the stories they hear on the political right that, when unchallenged, become really compelling and explain to people what they're seeing, even though I think it's so wrong, like morally, but also just materially, it's just not right.
I so appreciate that question and that answer, and all things are connected. Often the reactionary perspective that is built around scarcity and preferencing certain people over the other is what we're facing right now. So how do we think differently about showing up? The reason I sort of turn towards the storytelling is the more we know each other, the more we know each other. And so sharing those stories matters, and figuring out ways to help at the point in which one can. So I wanted to give an example of something we do here. About a year ago, we hosted, maybe it was in September, we hosted Ruth's Refuge to give a talk. And Ruth's Refuge basically has a storage unit as a place. They don't have an office. We give them an office here. But after they spoke, we realized they needed that. But their storage unit is a few blocks from here. And people can donate things that can then go to the homes of people who are setting up new homes. I think their status may have just achieved the fact that they now have status and can move into a home, and they need wares for that. So that's just like another way. If people have things, they can donate. We are a place for drop-off a certain day a week, and we can also, and then we let them have an office. That's a small thing, but it's an example of thinking how, as a congregation, with a place, with people, some more than others in terms of the numbers of people affiliated, what can we do? And I wanted to really sort of maybe roll into this question for you, Noah, is how is it that CBST does this? Because I notice a lot of our work relies on or uses employed labor, people who it's their job to do this. And then and a lot of things we do are volunteers. So we have a lot of volunteers coming, and they go to you and other people, and CBST is able to hire you. And I wanted to hear a little bit about that.
Sure, we are, we do have a substantial staff. I'm the clinic director. We have a full-time clinic coordinator, a full-time clinic navigator, 2 part-time staff attorneys, a graduate social work internship coordinator, and then we have lots of interns. We have 4 social work interns from Columbia and NYU. We had an interpretation intern this year from John Jay. We have a partnership with Fordham for an undergraduate intern. We often have summer law student interns. So there is all that, and then there's the volunteer program. I think when you're doing legal work like this, we have to be very careful about unauthorized practice of law, which is why everything needs to be reviewed by an attorney or someone like me who is an accredited representative. So I do think the legal sanctuary work, does not lend itself to a purely mutual aid organizing model, because when I've seen that happen, I think the quality of the work is low and actually you end up doing harm. There is a need for some professional expertise in legal work that we're doing. We can't center the attorneys completely, but we need them in the room big time, because when they're not, the work is really poor, I can say, from seeing other models that I wouldn't suggest. So yeah, we're fully funded by grants and by state and city money and individual donors. CBST is so generous to give us the space and to keep the lights on, and there are many indirect costs they cover, but our staff and our budget is covered by all that. Yeah, I hope that's helpful.
It's helpful. I think knowing that there are things we can give that don't cost, that might be sort of the space that we do for Ruth's Refuge. There's no real sweat off our back, in the same way that CBST, now located on 30th Street in Manhattan, can provide space for people to meet, but probably giving you Zoom rooms for all your meetings, and then hiring staff through grants. It's great. So I think we're good to thank you.
Thank you so
Is
much.
that your phone or mine? I don't think that's mine. I hear somebody's phone. I think that's Dupre, but I'm about to thank Noah and then invite up Dupre and Barry for our last number. Thank you so much.
Yes.